War tests a man's strength, but nothing could prepare this soldier for what lurked in the endless white of the frozen wilderness. On a night when the wind howled like screams through the trees, he believed his greatest enemy was the cold. Each step crunched against the snow, his rifle heavy, his breath turning to ice in the air. But he wasn't alone. Something ancient, something hungry was watching. They say the Wendigo is born from starvation and curses, a creature of the north that feeds on flesh and fear. Soldiers dismissed it as a legend, a fireside story told to keep men alert. Yet on this patrol, the legend came to life. What began as routine steps through the forest soon became a desperate fight for survival against a nightmare with no mercy. This is not just a tale, it is the soldier's own account, a true military horror story of an encounter with the Wendigo. The night had settled over the forest like a heavy shroud, swallowing the last traces of daylight. Snow fell in a steady rhythm, erasing footprints almost as quickly as they appeared. The soldier tightened his grip on his rifle, following orders he didn't fully understand. This patrol felt wrong from the beginning, as though some unspoken force urged them to turn back before they even left camp. The sergeant barked instructions, pushing the squad deeper into the trees. None dared question him, but unease gnawed at their minds. The maps were unclear, the weather worsening, and the silence of the woods unnatural. It wasn't the mission itself that frightened them. It was the feeling that the land itself did not want them there. Each breath came out as a cloud of white mist, hanging in the air like a signal to unseen watchers. The soldier could hear the crunch of boots behind him, but the sound did nothing to comfort him. He couldn't shake the sensation that someone or something was marching in step just beyond their formation, invisible yet present. Orders were orders, and soldiers were trained to obey. Yet in the heart of the wilderness, training clashed with instinct. Instinct whispered that the forest was alive, that the shadows between the trees were too thick, too deliberate. Instinct warned that they were trespassers in a place older than war itself. The patrol route had been hastily chosen, cutting through unfamiliar terrain. The commander claimed it was to cover ground quickly, but the soldiers suspected there was more to it. The path was narrow, hemmed in by towering pines whose branches formed a cage overhead. Their rifles felt small compared to the oppressive weight of the wilderness pressing down on them. At one point, the soldier thought he saw movement in the tree line, a flicker of motion there and gone. He blinked, convinced it was nothing but drifting snow. Still, his heart pounded harder and his steps grew heavier. He glanced at his comrades, but no one spoke. Fear lived in their silence, stronger than words could ever be. This was not the kind of silence soldiers cherished. On most patrols, quiet meant safety, discipline, professionalism. Tonight, it was suffocating. Every pause between footsteps sounded like a warning. Every gust of wind resembled a whisper in a language none of them could understand. The deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to close in, as if herding them toward some unseen fate. The soldier's mind wandered to the campfire stories he had overheard in hushed tones. Old tales about the Wendigo, a monster born from starvation and cursed flesh, lurking in the northern forests. He had dismissed them as superstition, as every rational man should. Yet now, trudging through the snow, those stories clawed their way back into his thoughts with frightening clarity. His gloves did little to stop the cold from biting at his skin. His boots were soaked from the endless snow. Every muscle begged him to turn back, to retreat to the relative safety of their base. But duty chained him to the path, dragging him deeper into what felt like a trap set long before his arrival. The sergeant raised his hand, halting the patrol. The soldiers froze, their rifles instinctively lifted. The wind carried no sound of enemy forces, no signal of danger from men, and yet something pressed against their senses, an invisible weight that demanded attention. The forest was speaking, not through noise, but through its oppressive stillness. One soldier whispered that they should not be here, his voice trembling despite his attempt at steadiness. The sergeant silenced him with a glare, but even he seemed unsettled. Orders had brought them this far, but something else, something unspoken, was waiting for them, and even authority had no answer for it. The soldier shifted uncomfortably, trying to ignore the dread tightening in his chest. It was not the enemy they had trained to face, not bullets or bombs or ambushes. This was different. This was the sense of walking into a story meant to be avoided, a story older than their uniforms and beyond the reach of their weapons. He thought of home, of warmth, of ordinary dangers that seemed almost comforting compared to this place. He imagined the sound of laughter, of music, of anything human, Yet all he heard was the forest breathing, slow and deliberate, as though it were alive. The trees leaned closer, their skeletal branches clawing at the night sky. Each step forward felt heavier, as though the snow itself tried to hold him back. His comrades trudged silently beside him, but they might as well have been ghosts. In that moment, he realized the patrol was not a mission, it was a march into something forbidden, something they had no business discovering. The squad pressed forward despite the heaviness of their steps. No one dared speak, for speech seemed dangerous, a violation of the silence that blanketed the land. They were not hunters here. They were prey, and instinct told them that the hunt had already begun. The soldiers' thoughts grew darker with every step. It wasn't just fear of what might lie ahead. It was the certainty that the patrol itself should never have been ordered. Some decisions invite death, and this one had already been signed in silence and snow. The soldier knew, though he couldn't explain why, that they were walking towards something waiting just for them. The snow stretched endlessly before them, a vast sheet of white broken only by the dark spines of trees. Every step the patrol took echoed with a crunch, sharp and crisp in the stillness. Yet soon the soldier noticed something troubling. The snow ahead bore markings, shapes that didn't belong to boots, tires, or any human pattern he had seen before. At first he thought it might be wildlife. Wolves or elk left plenty of tracks in these forests, but these prints were too long, too uneven, and disturbingly deep. They were human-like, yet distorted, as though something imitating a man had pressed its weight into the snow. His breath caught in his throat as he followed the trail with his eyes. The sergeant signaled them to spread out, rifles ready. The squad obeyed, but their movements lacked confidence. The prints stretched far beyond sight, winding between trees like a path laid deliberately. None of them had spoken of fear yet, but their eyes betrayed it. This was no ordinary patrol anymore. It was pursuit, though of what, none could say. The soldier knelt to study a print. It was wider than his boot, with elongated toes that clawed into the frozen crust. Whatever had left it carried weight beyond that of a man. He reached out, hesitant, but stopped before his glove touched the snow. Something primal urged him not to disturb the mark, as though it were sacred in a way no man could understand. The prints led forward, but what unsettled him most was their direction. They did not come from anywhere, no starting point, no gradual emergence from the woods. It was as though the footsteps began suddenly in the middle of the clearing, birthed from nothing, leading only deeper into darkness. That impossibility gnawed at his reason. He glanced at his comrades and saw the same realization dawning in their expressions. One soldier made the sign of protection across his chest, muttering under his breath. Another tightened his grip on his weapon until his knuckles turned white. The sergeant, stern as ever, gave no sign of fear, but even he lingered longer on the trail than usual. The wind shifted, carrying with it a scent that didn't belong to the frozen air. It was faint but sharp, a mixture of iron and decay. The soldier's stomach tightened as he realized it smelled like blood, aged and sour, lingering just beyond the reach of their senses. Whatever had walked here was not simply moving, it was hunting. The soldier forced himself to look further ahead. The trail zigzagged unnaturally, as though the creature had walked with no purpose other than confusion. Yet one detail turned his blood cold. The prints occasionally overlapped the squad's own, though they had never seen anything cross their path. That meant the footsteps were fresh, made only moments before, perhaps while they marched unaware. The realization spread through the patrol like fire. They were not following the trail, they were being followed. The unseen walker had always been near, stepping where no man should have walked, mocking their presence with every silent pace. The forest seemed to lean closer around them as they advanced. Shadows pooled between the trees, stretching like dark veins across the snow. The patrol's boots pressed into the path of the strange footprints, but no one dared admit what they felt, that they were intruding on a route not meant for human feet. One soldier finally broke the silence, whispering a question that no one answered. Why do they never lead back? It was true, the tracks had no return, no sign of retreat. Whatever left them was always moving forward, further from the known world and deeper into the unknown. The sergeant ordered them onward, but the soldier felt resistance in his own body. Every instinct screamed at him to stop, to abandon the trail and turn back. Yet he obeyed, knowing discipline held stronger than fear, at least for now. Still, the unease carved deeper into his chest, growing heavier with every step. He wondered who or what could create such prints. A starving wanderer lost in the snow? A deserter driven mad by hunger? The possibilities were grim, but none seemed as terrifying as the truth he refused to name the Wendigo. The legend clawed at his mind, stitching together every detail, every warning he had once dismissed. The deeper they followed the steps, the more the air seemed to change. It grew heavier, colder, as though the forest had taken notice of their intrusion. Even the snow fell differently here, slower, drifting like ash from an unseen fire. The prints remained endless, guiding them toward a destination none of them wanted to reach. When the soldier turned briefly to glance behind, he froze. Their own tracks were vanishing, filled by fresh snowfall as if nature itself sought to erase their presence. Soon, only the other set of footprints would remain, markings of a journey taken by something not of their world, and by those foolish enough to follow it. A strange stillness overtook the group. No one spoke, no one dared break the suffocating air between them. They simply moved, compelled by duty and dread, along a path carved by something unseen yet undeniably real. And though their boots pressed into the snow, each man silently wondered the same chilling thought. Were these truly footsteps at all, or warnings carved into the earth by the creature that waited ahead? The deeper the patrol pressed into the forest, the colder the night became. It was not the kind of cold born of winter storms or icy winds. This was a different chill, one that seemed to seep from the ground itself, rising into their bones like a sickness. The soldier shivered, though his gear was built for harsher climates. He exhaled, watching his breath form in the air, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw shapes in the vapor, curling like fingers. He blinked hard, convinced it was fatigue. Still, unease gnawed at him, for the cold felt alive, carrying something within it that words could not name. The squad tightened their formation, rifles angled at the shadows between the trees. No one spoke. It was as if the frost itself would swallow any sound they dared release. The silence was complete, until the soldier heard it. A faint murmur carried on the wind, soft as a dying man's last prayer. At first, he thought it was the voice of one of his comrades. He turned, scanning their faces, but none of them were speaking. Their jaws were clenched, their eyes forward, every man locked in grim silence. The murmur came again, clearer this time, curling through the trees like smoke. It was not one voice but many, layered whispering in tones that shifted from low growls to broken sobs. The soldier's stomach twisted. The language was unfamiliar, yet something in it stirred his instincts, as though the meaning lay beyond words, striking directly at his fear. The whispers grew stronger with every step, filling the spaces between the crunch of boots and the howl of wind. Sometimes they sounded close, right at his ear, and he spun sharply only to find no one there. Other times they drifted from a distance, echoing across the tree line as if an unseen crowd surrounded them. He tried covering his ears, but it made no difference. The sound was not merely heard, it was felt, vibrating in his chest like a second heartbeat. His breath quickened, and though he wanted to dismiss it as wind through the branches, he knew better. The forest was speaking, and it had chosen them as its audience. The sergeant raised a fist, signaling a halt. The patrol froze, rifles drawn tight to their shoulders. The whispers fell silent in unison, as though obeying the command as well. That sudden absence was more terrifying than the sound itself, for it left only the pounding of their own hearts to fill the void. Then came a laugh. It was faint, brittle, almost playful, but it broke the silence like a knife. The soldier flinched, and so did the man beside him. A laugh in the middle of the frozen wilderness, where no man walked, where no man should have been. It came and went in an instant, but its echo lingered like a curse. The soldier tried to steady his breathing. His training told him to analyze threats, to remain rational, yet rationality crumbled against the impossible. No enemy moved unseen in such vast terrain. No enemy laughed with voices that belonged to no throat. He knew then that this was not a man they were following. The trees around them groaned, their branches bending under invisible weight. The sound blended with the whispers until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. It was as if the forest itself bent closer, listening, waiting for a reaction. One soldier whispered a prayer under his breath, too quiet for the sergeant to scold. Another man's teeth chattered, though not from the cold. Fear had hollowed them out, carving cracks in their discipline, and still the whispers pressed closer, seeping into their thoughts like water through stone. The soldier thought of legends again, the Wendigo's call said to lure men from their groups, driving them mad with hunger and terror. He wanted to dismiss it, to laugh at his own fear. But no laughter came, only a dry throat and a pounding heart that told him the old stories were not stories at all. The sergeant finally ordered them forward, his voice louder than necessary, as though volume alone could drown the whispers. The squad obeyed, but each man's eyes darted into the darkness, searching for shapes among the trees. Every shadow seemed alive, every gust of wind a voice. The soldier's boots slipped slightly on a patch of ice, and in that stumble he swore he heard his own name hissed from the tree line. He froze, breath caught, certain he had imagined it. Yet when he glanced at his comrades, he saw the same fear mirrored in their faces. They had each heard something meant for them. From then on, the whispers changed. They no longer spoke in strange tongues, but in fragments of memory. Mothers calling, lovers weeping, brothers warning. The forest was no longer distant, it knew them, and it was peeling them apart piece by piece. The patrol pressed deeper into the cold, their formation fractured by doubt. Every step forward was slower, heavier, as though the forest were binding their limbs. The soldier gritted his teeth, desperate to resist, but his mind spun with the sound of familiar voices that should not exist in that place. And still, above all else, one truth became clear. The cold was no longer just weather. It was a messenger, carrying whispers of something older than the world they knew. A force that fed not on bodies first, but on the minds of those foolish enough to wander into its reach. The soldier's gaze lingered on the endless path of distorted footprints ahead. Whatever walked before them had left more than tracks. It had left an invitation, and through the cold that carried whispers, the patrol realized the forest was asking them a question none of them wished to answer. Would they follow to the very end? The forest had grown so dense that the moonlight barely pierced the canopy. Every shape blurred into shadow. Every shadow seemed to shift when the soldier blinked. He kept his rifle raised, but it felt more like a comfort object than a weapon. For in this place, metal and bullets seemed powerless. The squad advanced slowly, breaths fogging in the frigid air. The whispers had faded, but the silence that replaced them was worse. It was heavy, unnatural, and it pressed on their eardrums until each man felt as though he were being smothered by quiet. It was in that silence that the soldier first noticed the eyes. At first, he thought they were tricks of the light, reflections of moonbeams caught on ice or snow. But no, these glimmers moved. They blinked, they stared. Pairs of eyes scattered among the trees, faint but unmistakable, watching with patience too deliberate to be chance. The sergeant hissed an order for them to halt. The squad froze, their boots sinking into the snow. The soldier felt sweat slide down his back despite the cold. He counted them 2, 5, 10 more. They were too high for wolves, too steady for owls. These were not the eyes of animals. One pair glowed brighter than the rest, a sickly yellow-white, unblinking. They locked on to him, and for an instant he felt the same way a rabbit must when caught in the sights of a predator. His chest tightened, and he struggled to breathe under the weight of that gaze. The soldier lifted his rifle higher, finger tightening on the trigger, but the sergeant raised a hand sharply. Firing into the dark would mean madness, drawing out what they couldn't see. Still, the soldier's instincts screamed for him to act, to do anything other than remain still under that piercing stare. The eyes didn't vanish when he blinked. They didn't shift like reflections. They hovered, motionless, set deep within the tree line as though the forest itself had sprouted faces. What unnerved him most was how they seemed to grow in number the longer he looked. 2 became 4, 4 became 8, until the woods felt alive with silent witnesses. Each pair gleamed with hunger, not wild or frenzied, but calculated as though weighing the men, deciding when to strike. The soldier realized in horror that they weren't just being watched, they were being measured. A comrade whispered too loudly, asking what it was. The sound broke against the silence like a snapped branch. Instantly, several pairs of eyes shifted, all turning in unison toward the speaker. The soldier's gut twisted. Whatever they were, they understood sound. They reacted, and they were aware. The squad stood paralyzed for long moments. The forest around them seemed frozen in anticipation, as though everything snow, wind, trees waited for a signal. It was unbearable. The soldier's grip ached from holding his weapon too tight. He felt as though even his heartbeat was loud enough to betray him. Then, in the far distance, one pair of eyes blinked and vanished. Another followed. Then more, disappearing deeper into the dark. Relief brushed through the squad until they realized the mistake. The eyes were not gone. They were moving, surrounding, closing in from the flanks. The soldier's ears rang with the sound of his own pulse. He turned, desperate to track them, but the eyes reappeared in places they shouldn't be, sliding between trees with inhuman speed. There was no sound of feet, no rustle of leaves, only the constant, unbearable sight of glowing orbs shifting closer and closer. The sergeant ordered them to hold position, his voice steadier than his hands. The men obeyed, but their discipline trembled under the weight of fear. No enemy had been taught to them like this. No manual could explain the sensation of being prey to countless unseen predators at once. The soldier tried to steady his breathing, telling himself this couldn't be real. Yet his body betrayed him, refusing calm, locked in primal terror. The eyes bore into him, drilling past flesh and bone into the part of him that still remembered caves, firelight, and the predators of ancient nights. Suddenly, the forest seemed alive with motion. The eyes shifted higher, lower, vanishing, then reappearing where no path led. Some hovered near the ground as though crawling. Others perched high in the branches, peering down like vultures awaiting death. The soldier realized they were trapped in a circle, penned in by something that chose not to reveal its shape. One man broke. With a cry, he raised his rifle and fired. The shot cracked through the stillness, echoing across the woods. For a moment, the soldier thought the sound itself might drive the eyes away. Instead, it only stirred them. The treeline flickered with movement, and for the first time, a sound emerged, a low, guttural growl that did not belong to any known beast. Snow fell heavier now, masking the ground in white. Yet those eyes cut through the storm, glowing with an intensity that suggested no weather could obscure them. They were constants, like stars in a cursed sky, orbiting closer until even the bravest soldier quivered beneath their gaze. The sergeant shouted for calm, but his voice shook. The soldier realized then that the eyes had won a victory already. They didn't need to attack. Fear itself was the weapon, and it had already pierced every man in the patrol. Still the eyes watched. Still they lingered. And the soldier knew with dreadful certainty, these were not the eyes of men nor animals. These were the heralds of something older, something patient, and something that would not let them leave the forest alive. The forest had tested their nerves with silence, with whispers, and with watching eyes. But nothing prepared the patrol for the moment the legend stepped out of shadow. The soldier had heard stories his whole life, campfire tales of cursed men who became monsters, flesh-eaters of the north. He never believed them, until now. It began with a smell. Rot, sharp and heavy, rolled across the snow like invisible smoke. The stench was so strong it burned his throat, turning each breath into nausea. Even before he saw it, the soldier knew. Whatever was out there had fed recently, and it had not fed on animals. Branches snapped in the distance, not like a deer or wolf breaking twigs, but slow, deliberate, heavy. The sound carried weight, each step pressing deep into the frozen ground. The squad tightened their grips on their rifles, eyes darting wildly as they searched for a target that refused to show itself. The growl came next, low, ragged, more human than beast, yet stripped of all humanity. It vibrated through the air, through their bones, through the soldier's very core. It wasn't just sound, it was hunger given voice. Then finally it appeared. Tall, skeletal, its limbs stretched unnaturally long. The soldier saw its silhouette first, framed in the pale light between the trees. The creature stood on two legs, but they bent awkwardly as though its bones had forgotten how to carry weight properly. Its arms dangled too far, ending in clawed fingers that scraped bark as it moved. Its head was the worst. Antlers jutted from its skull, tangled and broken, like the remnants of a crown. Its face was a mockery of man, stretched thin over sharp bone, with eyes that glowed like embers in a dying fire. The mouth hung open, far too wide, jagged teeth slick with something dark. The soldier realized with horror that it wasn't just a beast. It wore scraps of humanity, like a cruel reminder of what it had once been. Every story, every warning told around fires suddenly felt inadequate. The Wendigo was not myth. It was here, breathing, watching, starving. The squad froze, discipline shattered by the sheer impossibility before them. Some soldiers whispered prayers, others muttered curses, but none moved. The Wendigo's presence drained the strength from their limbs. They were soldiers trained to fight men, not nightmares. The creature tilted its head, studying them like prey. It did not rush, did not strike. Instead, it circled slowly, its body shifting with jerks and lurches, like a puppet tugged by invisible strings. Snow clung to its ragged frame, but it didn't shiver. The cold belonged to it. The soldier thought of the whispers earlier, of the voices carried on the wind. He understood now they weren't the wind, they were the Wendigo's lure, pulling them deeper, unraveling their minds until escape was impossible. This was not just a hunter, it was a predator of the soul. Every instinct screamed at him to fire, but his finger refused to squeeze the trigger. What good were bullets against something born from legend and curse? The Wendigo had walked untouched through generations of fear. It would not fall easily to mortal weapons. It crouched suddenly, its limbs bending in unnatural angles. The soldier braced for an attack, his body trembling, but the monster only sniffed the air. Its chest heaved, rib cage visible beneath pale skin, as though hunger alone gave it form. Then it let out a scream, shrill, piercing, carrying across the forest like glass shattering in the night. The sound shredded their composure. One soldier stumbled back, nearly dropping his weapon. Another cried out, firing blindly into the trees. The shots rang useless, striking bark and snow, but the Wendigo barely flinched. Instead, it smiled, a grotesque stretch of its mouth, revealing rows of teeth too sharp for man, too deliberate for beast. The sergeant barked orders to hold the line, but his voice was drowned by the pounding of blood in their ears. The Wendigo stepped closer, and with every step, the forest seemed to bend, the snow to darken, the very world to shrink around them. The soldier locked eyes with it, and in that gaze he saw fragments of humanity twisted into something unspeakable. A warning perhaps of what men could become when consumed by greed and hunger. It wasn't just a monster, it was a mirror of man's darkest instincts, dressed in flesh and bone. The creature's claws scraped across a tree, peeling bark as easily as paper. The sound set the soldier's teeth on edge. Then it paused, standing perfectly still, the forest holding its breath with it. For one unbearable heartbeat, no one moved. And then, with sudden violence, it lunged, not at them, but past them, vanishing into the tree line as quickly as it had appeared. The soldier's knees nearly gave out. The Wendigo was not retreating. It was playing, testing, choosing. He knew then the legend's cruel truth. The Wendigo never rushed its prey. It stalked, it studied, and it waited. And as the echoes of its scream faded into the dark, the soldier realized the hunt had only just begun. The Wendigo's scream still echoed in the soldier's ears as silence fell once more. The patrol stood scattered, some trembling, some clutching their rifles so tightly that their knuckles blanched beneath their gloves. Fear had splintered discipline, yet in that chaos, one thought burned inside the soldier's mind. If they ran, none would survive. The sergeant's voice cracked as he shouted for order, but the men were deaf to command. Their gazes darted into the tree line, searching for those glowing eyes that vanished and reappeared like sparks in a storm. The Wendigo was circling, unseen yet ever present, and panic was spreading like wildfire. The soldier swallowed hard. He had not come here to be prey. His training had drilled into him the need to stand firm, to fight even against impossible odds. The fear clawed at him, whispering to run, but he forced himself to plant his boots in the snow. One man needed to make a stand, or all would be lost. He drew in a breath so cold it burned his chest. His eyes swept the tree line, and when he saw the flicker of movement, a shadow too fast, too deliberate, he raised his rifle and fired. The gunshot ripped through the night, echoing like thunder. Snow burst from a tree trunk where the bullet struck, but no body fell. The Wendigo responded with a guttural roar, closer than before. The soldier felt the vibration of it in his ribs, his heart hammering like a drum. He chambered another round, teeth clenched, determined not to falter. If the monster wanted prey, it would find him ready. The others looked to him, some in terror, others in desperate hope. His defiance had broken the paralysis that held them, proving the thing could be resisted if not killed. The soldier knew this was no ordinary battle. Bullets might not bring the creature down, but courage was a weapon of its own. He shouted at his comrades to form up, his voice raw but steady, demanding they remember their training. For a moment their eyes shifted from the trees to him, and in that fragile instant, he became the anchor holding them together. Though he feared the legend, though he doubted survival, he refused to bow. His stand was not just for himself, it was for all of them. The Wendigo moved again, its shadow darting between the trees. This time, it was faster, testing their reactions, probing for weakness. The soldier tracked the motion with his rifle, finger steady on the trigger, refusing to blink. The monster wanted fear. He would give it steel instead. Another soldier fired, then another. Their shots sprang into the darkness. The forest exploded with sound, branches snapping, snow bursting into the air. Whether they struck the beast or not, it didn't matter. The noise alone gave them strength, reminding them that they were still soldiers, not prey, cowering in the cold. But the Wendigo was cunning. It did not charge blindly. It danced between trees, its gaunt frame weaving through the night with unnatural speed. The soldiers saw glimpses of it, jagged teeth, a clawed hand, those cursed glowing eyes, always vanishing before the trigger could be pulled. It was toying with them, dragging the fight into exhaustion. His hands shook, but not from the cold. It was the weight of knowing that this enemy did not bleed like men, did not fall like beasts. Still, he forced himself to breathe evenly, to hold his ground, to remind himself that courage could be contagious. If he wavered, the others would break. Snow swirled harder, driven by sudden winds that seemed born from the Wendigo itself. Visibility shrank, but the soldier refused to lower his weapon. His breath came in ragged bursts, fogging his vision, but he blinked through it. Somewhere in that white curtain, death was waiting. A crack split the night, a tree falling under some unseen force. The squad flinched, spinning to face it, but the soldier held steady. He knew the beast's trick. It wanted their backs exposed. He turned toward the silence that followed, listening harder than he ever had before. And then he saw it, emerging fully at last, stepping from the tree line as if tired of games. The Wendigo's limbs unfolded with grotesque slowness, its height towering over the men. Snow clung to its ribs, its claws dragged furrows in the ground. Its glowing eyes locked on the soldier. It had chosen. His pulse thundered, but he did not lower his aim. He thought of home, of faces waiting for him, of every battle he had endured before this one. None compared. Yet in that moment, he understood what his duty meant. Not victory, but defiance. To fight even when the outcome was certain. He steadied his rifle, shouting for the others to fire with him. Bullets ripped into the night, the air filled with smoke and thunder. For the first time, the Wendigo recoiled, not in pain but in annoyance, as though swatting at insects too stubborn to die. Still, the soldier pressed on, refusing to yield. The beast lunged, its claws striking the ground where he had stood a heartbeat before. He rolled, snow biting his skin, and came up firing. The roar that followed shook the trees, but his stance held. He was a soldier, and soldiers did not run. He screamed back, not in fear but in fury, pouring every ounce of defiance into that sound. Around him, the squad found their voices, their rifles, their courage. For the first time, the Wendigo met resistance it could not ignore. And though the outcome was uncertain, though survival was fragile, one truth was undeniable. In that frozen wilderness, a soldier had chosen to make his stand, and the legend itself had been forced to reckon with his defiance. The echoes of gunfire faded, leaving only the moan of the wind winding through the trees. Smoke hung in the air, mingling with falling snow. The soldier's ears rang, his chest heaving as he fought to steady his breath. Around him, the patrol shifted uneasily, caught between terror and disbelief. The Wendigo had retreated into the tray line, its glowing eyes swallowed by shadow, but the soldier knew it was not gone. It was waiting, patient and cruel, watching them weaken with every passing moment. Their victory was only borrowed time. The sergeant barked orders to regroup, his voice thin and hollow. The men moved closer together, rifles still raised, though their hands trembled. Discipline was frayed, but it had not yet broken entirely. They clung to routine like drowning men grasping at driftwood. The forest pressed in around them, suffocating in its silence. Every soldier felt the weight of unseen eyes. The snow beneath their boots seemed louder than it should have been, each crunch a signal to the creature that they were still alive, still running out of strength. The soldier swallowed hard, his throat raw from the cold air. He looked at his comrades, seeing exhaustion etched into their faces. Their breaths came heavy, their eyes darting, their bodies stiff. The Wendigo hadn't killed them yet because it didn't need to. Fear was doing the work for it. They pressed on, deeper into the woods, each man dragging himself forward on sheer will. No one spoke, for words seemed dangerous, as though the sound might summon the monster back into the open. The silence was heavy, almost alive. wrapping itself around them like chains. The soldier could hear his heartbeat pounding like a drum inside his ears. He thought of the stories again, the ones that claimed the Wendigo drove men mad before it devoured them. Perhaps that was its true weapon, not its claws, but its patience. Perhaps survival meant more than fighting. It meant enduring the silence without breaking. One soldier stumbled, collapsing into the snow with a muffled cry. Two men rushed to help him, their rifles momentarily lowered. The soldier's eyes darted toward the treeline, half expecting to see the glowing orbs reappear at the moment of weakness. But the woods remained still, mocking them with their emptiness. The sergeant urged them to keep moving, his voice hoarse. The soldier obeyed, though every step felt heavier than the last. The cold was relentless, seeping through clothing, biting into skin, numbing fingers that clung desperately to weapons. They were no longer marching, they were crawling toward survival. Somewhere behind them, a branch snapped. The sound was faint, almost delicate, yet it shattered their fragile rhythm. The soldier froze, his breath held, eyes scanning the dark. Nothing moved, yet the dread returned in waves. The Wendigo was still there, haunting every step, every pause, every heartbeat. The forest seemed endless, the path unmarked, and the night eternal. The soldier could not tell how long they had walked or how much ground they had covered. Time lost its meaning in the frozen silence. Each minute felt like hours, each hour like days. He wondered how long they could endure before someone broke completely. Already, he saw it in their eyes. The vacant stares, the trembling hands, the fatigue that pressed them closer to surrender. Men trained for war were unraveling under the weight of something beyond war. The soldier clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain steady. If he faltered, others would follow. If he stood firm, perhaps they would too. Survival was not just his duty. It was his burden, heavy as the rifle strapped to his back. The silence deepened, so profound it seemed to drown out thought itself. It was not the silence of peace, but of waiting. The soldier realized then that the Wendigo didn't need to kill swiftly. It hunted through time, stretching the hours until men broke on their own. Survival was not a matter of defeating the monster, it was a matter of outlasting the silence. When the first snowflake landed on his cheek, colder than the rest, he felt a strange clarity. They were still breathing, still standing, still resisting. The Wendigo had not claimed them yet, and as long as they moved, however slowly, it had not won. The soldier exhaled, long and steady, watching his breath vanish into the night. He lifted his rifle, though his arms shook, and pressed forward through the snow. Every step was agony, every moment a battle. Yet he moved, and in the heart of that frozen silence, survival meant moving one step further than fear wanted him to go. The soldier lived to tell the tale, but survival came with a cost. His body escaped the forest, yet his mind remained trapped among the snow and shadows. Long after the patrol returned, he felt the cold clinging to him as though it had seeped too deep to ever leave. At night, he lay awake, listening for whispers in the wind. Sometimes he swore he still heard them, faint, broken voices calling his name. He told himself it was memory, nothing more, but memory had no weight, and these whispers pressed against his chest like unseen hands. His comrades rarely spoke of that night. Some refused to mention it altogether, while others buried it beneath laughter too forced to be real. Yet every man carried it in silence, the same hollow look in their eyes, the same hesitation when asked about the wilderness. None of them had truly left it behind. The soldier polished his rifle every morning, though he knew no bullet could kill what they faced. It was not ritual but defense, a fragile illusion of control. He understood that the enemy he feared could not be stopped by steel, but still, the weapon gave him something to cling to. When he passed through crowded streets, he sometimes froze, convinced he saw those glowing eyes between alley shadows. His heart raced until he blinked them away. He smiled weakly when questioned, but deep inside he knew the Wendigo was not bound to the forest alone. It followed him, invisible, lingering. Dreams became the cruelest prison. In sleep, the soldier walked the same snow-choked path again and again, his boots sinking into the prints that led nowhere. The eyes were always waiting in the tree line, watching, patient, never striking. Sometimes the Wendigo appeared, towering and skeletal, its mouth stretched too wide, its voice a scream that rattled the sky. Other nights it spoke in familiar tones, mimicking his loved ones, luring him deeper into its endless woods. He woke drenched in sweat, gasping, his fists clenched around sheets as if they were the rifle he had dropped years before. The dawn never brought peace, only exhaustion and the weight of remembering. His comrades drifted away over time. Some transferred to other units, others vanished into silence. He rarely asked, but in his heart, he feared the truth. Perhaps the Wendigo had claimed them one by one, not with claws, but with despair. Survival had spared their bodies, but not all souls endure the aftermath of such encounters. The soldier found himself wandering forests again, unable to resist their pull. He told himself he was searching for answers, for proof that what they saw was real. But in truth, he was searching for the eyes that had marked him. Part of him feared them, another part longed for them, as though only in that gaze could he confirm that his suffering had meaning. He tried to speak once, to share the story fully, but those who listened only laughed or dismissed him. They called it battle stress, hallucination, the tricks of an exhausted mind. He smiled bitterly at their words. They had not felt the whispers crawl into their skulls. They had not seen the antlers cutting against the sky. And so he remained silent. The story lived only in his heart, festering like a wound that never healed. He carried it in his posture, in the way he scanned crowds for danger, in the restless pacing of nights when the wind rose high. The Wendigo had become his shadow. Years passed, but the memories never dulled. Instead, they sharpened. Every winter brought the smell of rot back to his nose. Every snowfall reminded him of the footprints that began in the middle of nowhere. Time did not erode the terror. It preserved it. The soldier aged, but the fear remained youthful, raw, and relentless. In quiet moments, he caught his reflection and thought he saw something else staring back. A hunger not his own. A glimmer of the curse he had once glimpsed in the woods. He wondered if survival had made him victim or inheritor. And yet, he endured. Not because he was free, but because he refused to surrender. The Wendigo had not taken his life, though it claimed his peace. In every breath he drew, every sunrise he endured, he defied it in his own way. His survival was not victory, it was resistance. Still, on certain nights, when the air grew cold and the silence deep, he felt it again. The eyes in the tree line, the whispers in the wind, the presence that promised it was never truly gone. And in those moments, he understood the truth. The Wendigo does not vanish with the snow. It waits, always. The soldier's tale ended not with triumph, but with a haunting that clung forever. And though he walked among men, part of him never left that frozen forest. For once you have looked into the eyes of the Wendigo, you never stop seeing them again. When the gunfire stopped and the silence of the forest returned, the soldier knew one thing: this was no ordinary enemy. The Wendigo was not a myth, it was real, and it had marked that land with terror. Though he lived to tell his story, his eyes carried the weight of something mankind was never meant to face. Remember, the battlefield holds more than human foes. Some enemies come from the shadows of legend, and if soldiers can encounter them, so can anyone. This is Major Dread. Subscribe and prepare yourself for the next encounter with the unknown.